Hi, hello, how are you? I hope you're doing good. I had a wonderful weekend. My boyfriend's mother and her friend came to visit and we went to the beach and we had lots of coffee and the sun was out and the weather was amazing and it was just a really nice weekend, you know, going out to restaurants and sitting out in the sun. So today I thought I would talk about some of my favorite books that I've read, and they're not books that I've reread recently, it's just books that I loved the first time reading them. At least for me, when it comes to favorite books, it's a lot to do with frame of mind you're in, the story that the book is telling, but there's also the story that comes with the time in my life when I read these books. So I'm going to give you 6 books that stood out to me as great reading experiences. Okay, so I was actually wrong, it's 7 books and one of them is an audiobook. So yeah, my stack is 6 books, but so I'm going to start with everyone's favorite. Yeah, I feel like I see this one, especially the past few years, I've seen people talk about The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Understandably, I read this when it was brand new, when it had just come out. If you don't know, it's about 2 magicians who are playing a game. They each choose a young person to train in the arts of magic, and the Night Circus is sort of the grounds where this very long game or duel or bet takes place. But it's several stories that intertwine. It's amazing, it's incredibly intricate, and when I look at this cover, I can smell popcorn and caramel and like a bonfire, and it's incredibly immersive. And I found this book, I was an exchange student, found this in a bookshop in Launceston, Tasmania, and read it on the bus to uni. So I very much associate this book with that time in my life. I was very excited to be alone abroad among other international students, learning in a different way than I would have in my home country, and just having a very adventurous time in my life. I really wanted to savor it. I didn't want it to end. When people ask me what my favorite book is, I usually say this one because I think it's almost a perfect book. And it's fantasy, so we only have 2 more fantasy books on the list. Next book on the list, I don't think I've seen a lot of other people talk about, but it's this book. It's called The Ninth Gate by Alex Bell. Wait, The Night Circus and the Ninth Circle. That's confusing. A man comes round on the floor of a shabby flat in the middle of Budapest. His head is glued to the floorboards with his own blood. There's a fortune in cash on the kitchen table, and he has no idea where or who he is. And that hooked me. So yeah, that's where the story starts, and it's just very intriguing. You want to know more. Yeah, it came out in 2008. I read this in 2011. I bought this in Budapest. I have family on my dad's side who come from Hungary, the south of Hungary, and we had been in Hungary. I had an extra day in Budapest before I flew back home. I saw this and read the back of it, and like as I was reading, went to all the different places around Budapest where it takes place, which I think definitely contributed to the story. But I had an amazing time reading this, and it is very haunting and engrossing, as it says on the cover. I definitely agree with. But yeah, if you're interested in medium-paced mystery, there's also a lot of biblical themes. I don't want to say it's like Da Vinci Code or Angels and Demons, because those are very dense. Like there's a lot of information. This is more like a light version, like an Angels and Demons light. The next book is The Binding by Bridget, which is a book that I listened to as an audiobook in like sort of Victorian times. And essentially in this world there are book binders who bind people's memories into books. So essentially if something has happened to a family, something scandalous or whatever, you can go and have that memory removed and placed into a book. And this is frowned upon, this practice of binding books or binding the memories into books. People who work in that business is a little bit on the edges of society. What happens to these books is people with money come and buy them and read them as entertainment. It's about this person goes to become an apprentice for this binder, and during the course of this apprenticeship things happen that relates to his past. I don't know if I can say anymore. Absolutely love this book. Yeah, I thought it was really well written. I loved every moment of listening to that. Right, that was fantasy out of the way. We're moving on to crime. This is a Swedish cover. It is And Then There Were None. Is that... wait, hang on. So, yes, it is called And Then There Were None. It used to be called something else, which I acknowledge was not a great title. It's Agatha Christie, which I'm not big into crime, that kind of thriller that everyone reads on vacation. But I absolutely love Agatha Christie. She's incredible at weaving intricate stories, and they're just charming. Her specific brand of whodunit kind of mystery. But there's also something so incredibly charming about the murders. She was just an iconic author. I can fully understand that there's some exotification. So I read Agatha Christie both for her stories, for her craft and the mystery, but also because I think it's fascinating to read things set in that time from an author who wrote it then. Anyway, that was a very long thing about defending why I'm reading Agatha Christie. So it's about 10 people being called to an island off the coast. They don't quite know who it is, but they're all guessing. And some people have worked for a person they think this might be, and some people have worked with or grew up with or is otherwise acquainted with this person that they assume has invited them to this place. And they come there and there's no one there. They start dying. And so these deaths start following the pattern of this nursery rhyme. And then there were none. I absolutely love this book. I was so inspired. I wrote a short story as I was reading this. It's the kind of book that you want to savor. I did not want this to end. I did not want to know how it ended because I wanted to speculate and keep wondering. So my favorite Agatha Christie book, and it's my intention to read all of her books. She's the perfect summer read in my opinion. Moving on to one of my first reading memories. Oh my god! I found my old little... look at that. Can you see that? That was in this book. Okay, wow, that brought me back. From the National Gallery in London. Yeah, so my mom took me to London when I was 9, and apparently I bought this. And then when I was 10, I read this. This is one of my first reading memories. I know I'd read books before I read this, but when I was, I think 10 or 11, in Sweden, at least at my school, there was this campaign to get kids to read more. And so for a whole week, that was all we did. Essentially spend all day reading books for 5 days. Anyway, so I don't remember what else I read this week, but I absolutely devoured this, and apparently I couldn't find it in any other language when I had a look online, but it's The Boy Who Lived with Ostriches. And it's based on a real story. The story of a boy, he's from, I think, a Bedouin, like a nomadic tribe in North Africa. And his mother put him down and hid him in order to go and get water, with every intention of going back to get him. But for some reason couldn't find him again, a sandstorm or something. Anyway, and this boy found by a herd of ostriches and was brought up by them. And so this book is about him learning to understand the language of the ostriches. In the book he can hear what they're thinking. These two ostriches that become his sort of like his parents, and he lived with them for years. So I was 11 when I read this book for that one amazing week in school. And I think about this regularly. Like I said, I couldn't find it. I think it's available in maybe Danish, Norwegian, potentially German. So I'm sorry, you might not be able to read that. But that was such a vivid reading experience from a young age that had a huge impression on me. So, with 2 more books on the list, I'm gonna go classical literature now with a Brontë sister, and it's not either of the ones that you might be thinking about. It's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. It took quite a while because it's a heavy book, not just heavy, but it's mentally heavy. So the reason I wanted to read it was because I'd heard somewhere, might be wrong, I'm not sure if it's true, but it's considered the first feminist novel. I'm not sure, there might have been some in the 18th century, but I can definitely see this being a feminist book. But basically it's about this strange woman who moves into Wildfell Hall. So she moves in with only one single servant and a young boy. Everyone is scandalized. She supports herself, she's a single woman, and she declines invitations to things. She doesn't behave like a normal woman at this time should, a woman of society, and rumors start to circulate. So the first part of this book is from a male perspective, a man in the village to which Helen comes. Kind of entitled, and I struggle to really like him. But anyway, through a series of events, she feels the need to finally explain to him what has happened. Yeah, so the middle part of the book is about Helen's perspective. She tells her life story, which is her being raised in the typical Regency way, you know, being pure of heart and gentle and all of those things that were expected of young women at the time, and how that did not stack up to her actual experiences of then meeting a man who completely turns her life upside down. She falls head over heels in love with him, and they marry, even though he somehow seems not interested in that. And once they marry, his true nature starts to come through, and he drinks and does other things and gambles, and a lot of debauchery is alluded to, and he is abusive. I have to say though, I obviously was interested in it because it was supposedly a feminist novel, which I'm interested in. I mean, it's very explicit for the time, and I think I was surprised by that. Having come from reading Jane Austen, I really loved reading that book. I think it was very eye-opening. Very early on in the book, Anne Brontë, she sort of explains her view of the masculine and feminine of this time and critiques it through a discussion that is held between characters in the book. Because obviously it's a dense book and I didn't know what to expect, but then that discussion came up, and that was what sold it for me. I found the ending a little bit disappointing based on how Helen is written throughout the book. A part of me wants to believe that it's the editor at the time who was like, this woman has to end up married at the end of the book. You know, that Little Women thing? I would highly recommend this book. I don't know if you could tell. Finally, last book is not fiction. It is biography by Emmeline Pankhurst. Are we surprised? Are you sensing a theme? I bought these at the same time when I was visiting friends in London, and I was clearly on a feminist wave thing. Here's the story of both of these books. I was visiting friends in London, walked into several bookshops because that's what I do when I travel, and I just noticed a pattern that annoyed me at the time. Maybe it was the water I was drinking, maybe it was the phases of the moon and the alignment of the planets. I don't know, but I walked into every single bookshop and I felt like the covers, because I judge books by covers, the covers I was drawn to were all written by male authors. The sort of main table that grabs you when you walk into a bookshop, it was like, I don't know how many books there were, but if there were 30 books, 3 of them were by women. And these are the sort of staff picks, or I don't know, the latest releases or whatever. The male covers were just so much more interesting. I actively had to walk over to a women's literature table. The covers were white, pink, baby blue, and yellow. And you know, there's a specific design for women's literature, or maybe exaggerating now, but that's, when I look back, that's how it felt. If you're not familiar with Emmeline Pankhurst, she's sort of the person who's been dubbed the leader of the suffrage movement, which is inaccurate because there were people before her, and the suffrage movement was not one movement. There were several parallel movements, but her branch of suffrage is probably the most famous because they were the ones who went off after a while of quiet protest and asking nicely. She sort of coined the slogan, "Deeds, not words," and with these deeds they would show that women were a force to be reckoned with. Famously, if you've seen the movie, which is supposedly based on this, I would say very loosely, you know, they plant bombs around London, they smash windows. It's about the treatment of these women, her own experience. They end up in jail, and but it doesn't just talk about what the work that she does with the suffrage movement. She talks about being raised by politically aware parents who supported the women's right to vote, but also how she works in workhouses and the poverty that she witnesses as she's a wealthy woman at this time, and how specifically women have no safety net. And I think what I found interesting reading it is those parts of it. I mean, it's absolutely horrific, the treatments that these women faced in just trying to be taken seriously, beaten down by police. Just her documenting the time and seeing where we come from and how what we have today is not something to be taken for granted. I would highly recommend it. It is dense, and she's definitely brought receipts. She writes everything in great detail, and which can be difficult to get through because it is meticulous. I did not read it in one go. I picked it up every now and then during the course of a year. So I hope this video isn't too long. Please comment below your favorite books, if there's books that sound like these ones. Maybe if you have some recommendations, I would love it. And if you're on Storygraph, find me. My handle is in the channel description. Or if you've read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts on them as well. Thank you if you made it all the way through. I am incredibly grateful. Anyway, take care. I hope I see you back here soon. Have a lovely day and a lovely weekend. And yeah, take care.